everybody, it's Katie from Originals, and today I'm going to show you how to crimp off and use crimp covers to add a professional finish to the end of your beaded necklace. Alright, so there's a few tools you're going to need today. One is going to be a pair of flat nose pliers. These are ones that are flat on the inside. You could also use chain nose pliers as well. You just want something that has a nice flat inside and no teeth. Our second tool that we are going to need is going to be a pair of wire cutters. These are going to cut off our beading wire for us. And the last pair we're going to need is going to be our crimping pliers. So these guys are where the magic happens, and it's actually going to fold our crimps in half so that they make them teeny tiny and they will fit inside of our crimp covers. Let's talk about the materials. We are going to be using something called crimp tubes today. These are these teeny tiny little tubes that we're going to squish basically, and it's going to hold our necklace together. There's also something called a crimp bead, which is much more rounded in shape, but if you're going to be using crimping pliers, you want to make sure that you have the crimp tubes and not crimp beads. The biggest thing to consider when you're buying a crimp tube is actually going to be the thickness of the wall of the crimp tube. See how nice and thick that crimp tube is? If it's too thin, it's just going to crumble when you crimp it, and because this holds everything together, you want to make sure you don't skimp on crimp tubes. Because crimp tubes is what holds everything together, you could stop at crimp tubes, but we're going to add a professional finish by adding crimp covers. So crimp covers are these little C-shaped things that when you close them up, they look like little round beads at the back of your necklace. These cover the crimp tubes and are purely a decorative accent that makes everything look nice and pretty. Okay, so I'm going to start with one end of my necklace. I'm going to take the bead stopper off that end, and I'm going to string two of my crimp tubes onto my beading wire. I like to do double crimps, and then we're going to grab our clasp. We're going to thread our beading wire into our clasp, fold it over and around, and push it back through those two crimp tubes, like so. We don't worry about this gap between our beads and our clasp on the first side. We'll get rid of it when we crimp the other side. We don't want our crimps too close to our clasp where it's too tight and it makes our clasp want to sit sideways. So you do want to leave a little space up there at the top. Then we are going to take our crimping pliers and we are going to put it in that middle hole that kind of looks like a heart or a smiley face. All right, I'm going to place one crimp inside that space. Make sure that it's centered and give it a nice tight squeeze. This puts a little groove all the way down our crimp so that we can fold it in half as part of the next step. I am going to push my second crimp tube up close but not 100% next to my first crimp because our crimp covers are going to need a little bit of space. I am then going to squeeze that nice and tight as well. So now you can see both of them have that nice little groove in there. Now we are going to be putting it in the first hole closest to the tip of our crimping pliers to fold it in half. When you put it in there, you don't want to lay it down in that space like this because you will just flatten it out. You actually want to stand it up on its side vertically in the crimping pliers like so, so that when I squeeze it, it folds the two halves in half. So that first crimp closest to the clasp is now completely crimped, and we need to repeat that for that second crimp. Again, we're going to stand our crimp up vertically in that first space and squeeze it nice and tight. That will fold our crimp over so that it is nice and tight. Sometimes I will put it in that little flat space right at the end of the pliers just to make sure that I've squeezed it completely tight. Your crimps are the most important part as this is what's holding your entire necklace together. So do make sure that these are actually crimped. If they're not 100% closed, your necklace will fall apart later, and we don't want that. Once I have the necklace at this stage, I'm going to cut off the tail here. Some people like to tuck the tail up inside their beads. I don't like to do this because if you were to push this into your beads, sometimes it can work its way out and then you will have a little scratchy tail that will bug the heck out of you. So we're going to go ahead and cut that off. I'm taking my wire cutters and the flat side of my wire cutters and I'm putting them really nice and close next to that crimp so I can cut as close as possible. Do make sure you're not going to clip that center cord or you're going to have to start all over again. Clip that off. Perfect. Give a little tug test. Everything seems nice and secure. And now I'm going to put on my crimp covers. So here's our crimp cover and we're going to hold it so that the opening of the little C is sticking up, so that we can go ahead and slip that crimp cover over that crimp tube. Once we have that inside of the crimp cover, we're going to take our flat nose pliers and we're going to gently squeeze it. Now I squeezed a little off and they went a little sideways, so I'm just going to squeeze them back into alignment before I continue squeezing it shut. Now you probably can see that there's still a little bit of a gap there at the top, and I don't want to continue squeezing from the sides because I will just squish it. So I need to come and fold in one side a little bit and come in and fold the other side in a little bit to get it to close up the whole way. And hopefully when you're finished, you have a nice little bead covering your crimp. Now we have 2 crimps, so we need to repeat that for the second one. Again, I'm just slipping my crimp inside of my cover, gently squeezing it shut, and then coming from the sides and squeezing it shut the rest of the way. And there you go. I'm going to push my beads up next to it, and look how professional and finished that looks. Now we need to repeat that on the other side, and we do want to make sure we don't have any gap between our clasp and our beads when we finish. So on the second side, again, we are putting 2 crimps. We are putting our clasp, and we are folding over to go through those 2 crimp beads, but keeping a loop around our clasp and pulling it tight. So you're at this point and we want to get rid of this space. I push the crimps down towards the beads, holding on to the clasp, and pull the tail, and it kind of zips itself up to be tight against the beads. Now when you are finished, you want to make sure that you actually hang your beads up and let the weight of the beads fall down, because you want to make sure that you're not pulling this too tight. Sometimes you can actually pull this too tight and your beads will be really stiff. So it needs to have a little bit of space so that it can hang and drape. Now I'm going to push the crimps apart again, so I have a little bit of space there, and we're going to put it in that heart-shaped spot of our crimping pliers, which is that middle space. Squeeze it nice and tight. Put our next one in there as well, in that middle space. Squeeze it nice and tight, and then fold them over by putting them standing up vertically in that first space. Once we are finished with that, we're going to take our wire cutters, go as close to the beads as you can without leaving a tail, and clip that off. And we're going to add our covers. And voila, we have finished off our necklace. We have our clasp attached. We have those little covers making it look nice and pretty and professional. And you're all good to go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.